So we move on to our presentation this morning. Will be led by Jay Goodman, and I'll be standing here like for moral support.
Good morning, all. Good turnout this morning, so hopefully everybody was interested in hearing what we've been discussing and what we hope to accomplish. So a little bit of background. Over the last 10 years or so, maybe a little longer, like most churches, our membership has declined. Corresponding income has declined. So we've been in a budget deficit situation for many years, and we've tended to run down our cash reserves to the point where it's, we're getting to the danger point. So Hampstead is obviously in the same position that we are, and it came to mind that maybe it would make sense to get together with them and see if they might be interested in sharing a pastor to try and save some expenses, same as, just like us. So we formed a little bit of a committee to jointly speak with Hampstead and find out if that's something that might work for both churches. Sorry about that. So we have been in discussions for the last few months. We had just a little exploratory committee. We met probably about 3 or 4 times. We did have a Zoom meeting with another 2 churches that have done this, and seems like maybe it might be a good fit, a good way to get us on a better financial position, and Hampstead, same, allow them to get on a little bit of a better financial position. They are at a point where they have an interim pastor. So they were in the process of deciding whether or not they wanted to try and hire a full-time pastor or to go after a part-time pastor. So the issue is that if they hire a full-time pastor, they're going to be in a budget deficit situation, same as we are. If they hire a part-time pastor, there aren't very many part-time pastors available. You're really looking at somebody that's local. Nobody from another part of the country is going to relocate to an area for a part-time position. Really diminishes your pool of available staff. So we've kind of got together and decided that maybe this is something we want to move forward on. So no decisions have been made. This is only discussion at this point. If this is something that we move forward on, the congregation would vote on that at annual meeting, and at that point, Hampstead would do the same thing, and we would move forward. So we've just Jim has put together a slide presentation just to give everybody an idea of what this would look like if we did decide to move forward. So the term for this is called Yoking. So it's essentially a cooperative staffing agreement that we would put into place with another church, and the church that we're looking at is Hampstead. So what is yoking? Yoking is basically one pastor would serve 2 congregations. Each of the congregations would maintain its own church, its own teams, its own office staff. We would maintain our own identity, our own budget. Everything is going to remain the same. The only thing that would be different is that our pastor wouldn't be here 4 days a week. Would only be here 2 days a week, because we'd be sharing the other 2 days with another congregation. So we would have our own services. Every Sunday morning, there'll be a pastor in the pulpit giving a service and also giving a service in Hampstead. So we would have to adjust our service times slightly. So one service would be early, one service would be later. We would have to work out how we would handle special services, but that's all going forward. That's all the logistics that go into it. At this point, we just want to decide if this is something we want to move forward with. So, what isn't yoking? So the two churches will not merge. They'll not become one. One church doesn't close. One church doesn't forego services. Everything moves forward the same. Again, the only difference is we only have a pastor in the office 2 days a week instead of 4 days a week. We don't have to sell property. We don't have to close any churches. Each church remains fully independent, operates exactly the same as it does today. What are the benefits? The biggest benefit would be financial. So it would essentially cut our budget for our pastor expenses in half because we would be sharing those expenses with another church. Hampstead does not have a parsonage. We do. So a good percentage of what we would be donating to this or giving to this joint venture would be the fact that we have a parsonage. So that those parsonage expenses would offset some of what we would have to actually bring forward in cash. So again, it puts us in quite a good financial position moving forward if we decide to do this. I don't need to go through the slides for the budget, unless people are interested. I can leave this in Lovejoy. People can look at it. It is up on the screen. You can see where we are. I think everybody's aware of where we have been the last few years from a budgetary point of view. We're averaging about a $50,000 deficit. So if we can close that deficit, it just puts us in a much better financial position. One of the big things, at least in my mind, that is a big negative with running a financial deficit is that our missions and community engagement team is not able to be out there and investing in the community the way that we really should be as a church. So if we can get onto some better financial footing, I think it helps us, especially out in the community. Some of the other benefits to yoking with another congregation, when we do go to call a pastor, we're able to offer a better financial package to that pastor. If you're looking to call a half-time or a three-quarter-time pastor, it just isn't very attractive to come to this area. It's a very high cost of living area. If the financial package is not there, you're going to have a difficult time drawing up the pastor that you want. In the future, we could decide to combine other resources with Hampstead. We could combine office staff. We could combine office equipment. There are many different things that we could decide to join together on later on, but that's to be determined in the future. That really has nothing to do with the discussion that we're having today. So what are the risks to moving forward to this? This is a new model for both congregations. It's going to take some getting used to. We may find that it doesn't work out. There's nothing that keeps us from dissolving this at any point in the future. The worship schedules are going to have to change. So somebody's going to have to take an early service, somebody's going to have to take a late service. We typically have moved our service to 9 a.m. during the summer. So as a congregation, we're kind of used to moving our worship services around. I don't really see that as a big issue. The pastor is going to be serving 2 churches, 2 communities. That means that the pastor is going to have less time in our community, in our church office, to attend meetings in the evenings, because he's going to have to be doing that same thing in 2 different churches. So that's obviously going to be an adjustment, something that we have to get used to. It's not uncommon for one church in a yoked situation to feel like they're getting the short end of the stick. The way that that's typically resolved is if a new pastor comes in If an existing pastor takes over the position, the pastor from the church that did not have a pastor typically feels like they're getting shorted. So the way to resolve that is to bring in a new pastor. We don't know what our future is going to look like from a pastor point of view, but at some point we will need to form a pastor search committee to look at bringing a new pastor. Jim is going to stick around for a while, and he's going to help in this whole transition. But at some point, he's going to be retiring. So that's something we're going to have to look at. So sorry, I'm having a hard time reading. So the pastor would give about half time with flexibility for special events. So let's say that, our church has 2 weddings this week and a couple of baptisms, maybe a funeral. So obviously, the pastor is going to have to spend a little more time with our church this week. Well, the same thing's going to happen in Hampstead at some point. Pastor's going to have to spend a little more time. So there's got to be some flexibility. The 2 days a week, has got to be not a hard and fast rule. It's just everything's going to even out in the end. Worship would be held at each church on every Sunday. The pastor would live in the Atkinson parsonage, and that would be a significant portion of our financial contribution to this process. Office hours would be held in each church. Pastoral care would still come from the pastor. He's still going to be in the community. He's still going to be reaching out to parishioners, but it's going to be in 2 churches, 2 different churches. He's going to meet with still the teams that we have and the teams that Hampstead would have. He just may not be able to attend every single meeting that he currently attends. Still going to lead all of the programs at each church, and he's still going to engage in community activities. But again, split between 2 communities, doesn't have unlimited amounts of time, so probably less engaged in each community than he would currently be if he was just in Atkinson. We've actually done this before. In 1946, Atkinson and Hampstead shared a pastor. Went on until 1952, when the pastor that was serving both churches went on to serve a larger congregation in Haverhill. So the next steps for this to move forward, we need to define the scope of what the pastor's work is going to be. We're in the process of drafting a covenant that would be the working document that the 2 churches would sign and would be their agreement to how things would look moving forward. We'll have presentations at both churches before we decide to move forward and before the church would vote to move forward on this. Both congregations would vote at their annual meetings in 2025. Ours is at the end of January. I think theirs is at the beginning of February. So we would know pretty soon, within the next few months, whether this is something we're going to move forward with. What's in the Articles of Agreement? Well, currently, and we looked long and hard, there aren't very many churches that are doing this. So we had a really hard time finding examples of agreements that are out there and available for research. So we would need a pastoral search committee at some point. We'd have to work out the financial responsibilities. There will be a covenant board, and the covenant board would be made up of members of both Atkinson and Hampstead, and it would define the role of the pastor between the 2 churches and would define the agreement and the logistics of how we move forward. would define how the pastor's time is divided, would set work with the pastor to set the office hours, and determine the times for the Sunday services. And again, there'll be members of both churches on that team. So what's going to happen next? So the covenant board is formed with equal representation. We would form a joint pastor relations committee. Once everything is worked out, the churches move to a time when a single bridge interim pastor serves both churches while the search process continues. So this is very similar to when, before we brought Jim on board, we had interim pastors, we had bridge pastors. So the process essentially would be the same. So once the pastoral search committee has a candidate that they would like to present to both churches, we would have a joint meeting with Hampstead, and then each church individually would go and have a vote on their own on whether to call that pastor or not. So again, there's a roadmap up on the screen about what this would potentially look like. Again, I'll leave these slides in Lovejoy. People can take a look at them as they want to. And I think Jim's going to put this up online so that people can look at this, without having to sit through the whole service. Not that would be bad. So, does anybody have any questions? I'd be happy to make an attempt at answering. Yes, Hank.
Who's representing our church in this exploration committee?
Right now, it's Sue and I.
Okay.
Yeah, and Jim. So, we'd love to have somebody else on board if anybody would like to join us. So,
I would say if you have a question, if you could stand and speak clearly so that the mics pick it up so it's heard on the live stream, folks.
I just have a question about if the covenant that Yoking goes through, must we do a pastoral search at that point? Or is this in the future?
that's at some point in the future, yes. Because right now, Hampstead has an interim pastor. We have a permanent pastor. So if the congregation votes to move forward, then we have to decide, do we move forward with Jim? Do we move forward with Hampstead's interim pastor? That's all the logistics that would have to start to be worked out after because, we can't put the cart before the horse. We can't decide who's going to be the pastor if we don't know if we're going to move forward in a joint venture with Hampstead. So we're trying to keep the two processes completely separate. So, anything else? Thank you for listening. I will be here for fellowship after the service. If anybody wants to thinks of something that they want to ask, I'm happy to field questions during fellowship time also. So thank you all.
That was way too easy. You sure you don't have any questions?
Hank's got another one.
Can you just let us know sort of where Hampstead is? Are they pretty much where we are in the process? Have they been briefed? Have they voted?
They had a meeting. Do you want to take this one?
No, it's okay. Sorry, I just can't help myself. They're essentially the same place. They have already had a congregational meeting where they had consensus around the idea of exploring the yoking and moving to the next step, which is, so they're slightly ahead of us, but they're already in an interim time, so they're doing some of this exploration already. So this was one of the options that was before them. Do we hire full-time? Do we hire part-time? Do we think about joining with Atkinson? And they chose the latter. And now they're waiting for us to gauge our interest so that we can think about putting together something a little more formal for the congregations to vote on.
Yes, ma'am.
I'd kind of like to know, what is your opinion on this?
Me?
Yes.
Okay, I wasn't sure if you're pointing at him or me. may have initially broached the idea to the leadership of our church and then had that conversation with the Hampstead Church. We have been bleeding money for a long time, and we keep sort of kicking the can down the road about that. And it's going to get to a point in 2 or 3 years in which our coffers are empty. And then we're desperate. And whatever we do in that moment will not be well-grounded because we'll be acting from a place of fear and desperation. So the time to try to fix what's wrong with us from a budgetary standpoint is now, while we still have some leeway, while we still have some reserves. If we wait until the last minute, it's not going to be good. So we have, over the last 7 years, pared expenses again and again and again. And other than eliminating or reducing staff again, we've already reduced the hours of the sexton and the office administrator in an effort to keep our finances in better shape, and that's barely put a dent in it.
And our CE director.
And we don't have a half-time CE director that we used to have, so we've sort of done all that we can do with that, and unless everybody suddenly gets much more generous than they are now, we'd need another $40,000 or $50,000 a year to have a balanced budget. That's just the truth of it. And so if you cut the expenses for the pastor in half, suddenly you're very close to a place where your budget's balanced. And I would rather see the church sharing a pastor with another local church. And for folks that are just here on Sunday morning, it'll be almost invisible. There'll still be worship here on Sunday. All about that will be the same. And I'd much rather see that than see the church in a place where 3 years from now they can't afford a part-time pastor because it's gone too far. And once you sort of reach that tipping point, it's almost impossible to come back. So I'm in favor. Regretfully, I wish there was something else to do, but I think it's the best option that's in front of us.
Yes, Marissa.
Oh.
Oh, sorry.
No, my question is about voting. I believe you said the vote would be at the annual meeting.
Yes,
So I guess you have to attend to be able to vote. Would you
Correct.
just do that one time, and it would be by a show of hands? Is that how it would be voting?
yes.
Okay, thank you.
Pastor Jim, I appreciate your sentiments, and I find them admirable. However, I wonder about not only the financial aspect, but the personal aspect, and I have concern about burnout. You've got things you know happening.
Thank you. The question sort of assumes that I'm going to be the person that's serving both churches, and I don't know that that's established. And in all probability, I might decline to be that person. I think that Hampstead already has an interim in place. To get to a place where a yoke pastor exists, we would need to be in an interim place along with them to do a pastoral search together. And that's best. And we need to move into the bridge, practicing that bridge before we get to the final place where we call the settled pastor, so that we're not sort of coming together suddenly the day that we call a settled yoke pastor, because then they're walking into a situation that hasn't been fully formed yet. So I think at some point, in the not-too-distant future, we need to move into a bridge time where one pastor is serving both churches. I don't think that's going to be me. And because, well, there's several reasons. One, I think it's better to have a trained interim to do that work. That's not me. Two, at some point in the future, Lynn and I are going to retire, and I don't want to walk halfway down this path with you and then either not be able to leave because I feel guilty about that, or leave in the middle of it and leave you guys having to start over again in the midst of something. So I suspect it's not going to be me that's the bridge, or the settled, yoked pastor at the other side.
Does that answer your question? Anybody else? Thank you all. And again, I'll be in fellowship time. If anybody thinks of anything they want to ask, I'm happy to try and field those questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Jay.